I wouldn't view Western Balkans and Western Balkan countries joining the EU as strictly enlargement. I would think of it more as consolidation of European territory, because these are 6 countries that are surrounded by EU territory. And if EU wants to play a global geopolitical role, as it says it wants, then it should, as a first step, be able to consolidate its own territory. Your institute and institutions like that are, I would say, repository of knowledge and know-how for people who study politics, but also for people who do politics, who work as politicians. Because as we know, politics is the only job that you don't need any qualifications or any references for. The only thing you need is to get the votes. And people from all, and it's right, but people from all walks of life can be politicians, can stand for office, can get votes and get into parliaments, get into governments. And then what? Then they need some place to turn to and be able to ask for support. Of course, there is civil service, but civil service is a very specific thing, and very often it is either very set in its ways, so it does things the same way regardless of what your plan or policy is, or sometimes it's also very influenced by the party that was in power, let's say, before you, or was in power for a long time. Think tanks, institutes of the kind that you have here are a repository of, let's say, non-political, very political, but non-political, in the sense very political, analyzing policies, understanding politics, understanding political theory, where things come from, but at the same time, not partisan, not rooting for one or the other party, looking at things and trying to look at things as they are. So institutions like that, or institutes like that, or think tanks, absolutely are necessary, I would say, for competent politics, for politics that to some extent is also rooted not just in passion, not just in sort of big speeches, but also in accumulated knowledge. I think the other aspect why these institutes are so important is also for the general public, because the general public is exposed to social media, to all kinds of what we now call fake news, basically lies, inventions, people trying to take advantage of the situation. And information analysis that comes from institutes like this is important to keep the general public grounded. And this is why I think it's so important. It's not enough that you do your research. It's very important that you disseminate it, that you talk about it, that you go into the media and talk about it and tell people, what your findings are, so that they also have some kind of balance, let's say, in how they view political events. I'm of the generation in Croatia that the most important vision for me was Croatia in the European Union. But not because I thought that being in the European Union is a big prize in the sense of joining a nice club. But it was because I always thought that for us, this whole process meant building institutions of the state. And when I was campaigning for Croatia's referendum for joining the European Union, I always used this story saying 5 generations of women in my family were all born, including myself and my daughter. We were all born in the same city. And if the 2 of us die in that same city, we would have all been born and died in the same city. But none of us would have been born and died in the same state. Over 5 generations. And that shows you how important stability of state institutions is for us, of course, but not only for us, I would say in general. Because if you don't have stability of institutions, you cannot expect people to trust institutions. So the only institution that they see as stable is family. And this is where nepotism comes from. This is where corruption comes from, because you believe only in this unit that has been there through time, because the state hasn't been through time. So I would say the leading, not only vision, but passion, was to build stable institutions that would serve people and recognize human dignity. And recognizing human dignity is, in translation, human rights. But I think people very often in state building forget to what extent human dignity and respect for human dignity is important for a functioning society. So this was my drive. I don't think the EU's approach to the enlargement to the 6 Western Balkan countries was very successful. I think for different reasons, political, internal, for different countries, it sort of stalled. There was the reflection, there was the fatigue, there was all kinds of things. However, I wouldn't view Western Balkans and Western Balkan countries joining the EU as strictly enlargement. I would think of it more as consolidation of European territory, because these are 6 countries that are surrounded by EU territory. And if EU wants to play a global geopolitical role, as it says it wants, then it should, as a first step, be able to consolidate its own territory. Now, EU started in its approach to Western Balkans many years ago, when circumstances were very different. And to some extent, and for some reason, it has maintained this same approach over the years, but it became obsolete. So the objective is still the same. The objective is get these 6 countries through a transformation process. So the idea is not to get them whatever they're like and just put them into the European Union, because that would be pointless. The whole point is to make them into at least a budding functioning democracies. But the approach needs to change. The goal is the same, but the approach needs to change. And in my opinion, at the moment, the best approach would be to get in the ones who want to get in and who are more or less ready. And there are a few who want to get in. Serbia, which was always the big issue, because the original approach, which made sense, was get Serbia in first, because it's the biggest, it's potentially the biggest disruptor, and once Serbia's in, everybody else will follow. That made sense 10 years ago. Absolutely. It doesn't make sense anymore because public support for EU membership in Serbia is at 36 to 38%, depending on which polls you look at. So, and its leadership definitely doesn't want to get into the European Union, I would say primarily for corruption reasons and Russian influence and all of that, but we've seen that. But that doesn't mean that Serbia should be left out. I think the new approach should be surround Serbia with success. So get the ones who can and are ready and want to get in, get them in. And Serbian president, if anything, is competitive with the neighbors. So I don't think he would tolerate everybody else making progress and Serbia being left behind. And I think the European approach should change in that direction. Croatia can play an important role and it can help a lot. It cannot play the crucial role. I think the crucial role needs to be played by the big players in the European Union. They have to sort of take that as a task. It cannot play the crucial role because of its, let's say, to be polite, complicated relationship with some of the neighbors. But objectively speaking, it's in Croatia's vital interest that these countries gradually join the European Union, because at the moment, Croatia is sort of the outer border in terms of everything: security, people trafficking, arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, crime, everything. If you had countries on Croatia's border who were operating under more or less the same legal system and the same model as Croatia and all the other European countries, it would be, for Croatia would be much safer, and it would be, of course, much easier, even speaking on a very banal level, much cheaper, because their security would be sort of moved further east. But because of its complicated relationship, because of the wars in the 90s and different things, I don't think Croatia can, in all these cases, play a crucial role. However, there are things in which Croatia is absolutely extremely helpful. For instance, of the 6 countries, 4 roughly speak the same language. Croatia has translated acquis communautaire. Okay, it's acquis communautaire from years ago, but it's still the basis. They're all using that translation. We gave it to them for free. We paid millions of euros for it, but we gave it to them because it was in our rational interest. Okay, they need to do more. Croatian civil servants who have been through the whole process are a gold mine for the civil servants in all of these countries to help them go through the accession process. Like, for instance, even at the time when we were fighting, we were sort of accessing to the European Union, but we also had this border conflict with Slovenia, and Slovenia was blocking us for 9 months in our negotiations. But all our civil servants said, even during that time, a week in Slovenia for them was more helpful than months of all kinds of twinning projects and God knows what, because they come from the same institutional and political background, understand the obstacles. So on this, let's say, lower level, Croatia could help a lot and should help a lot, and I think would help a lot. On the big political level, not for all countries. For instance, Croatia's reputation in Bosnia and Herzegovina is questionable. In Serbia, I don't think they would accept it. Maybe in some other countries, yes, it would be acceptable. But I would say the combination of Croatia's experience being used and knowledge being used in these countries, plus some of the aspects of the Baltic accessions, where they were helped by the Nordic members of the EU, in the Balkans would be probably the best sort of model for pushing this whole region, I would say, towards European stability, because this is always viewed as Western Balkan stability, Southeast European stability. But actually, throughout history, a lot of European destability came from that region. And that should be a lesson. This region might be small, but it has a lot of nuisance potential.